Have you ever wondered where the fairies of our stories really come from? Not the tiny sparkling creatures of children's tales, but beings of power, mystery and magic that may once have been worshipped as gods. Long ago, before churches and cathedrals dotted the landscape, people honoured mighty deities whose lives and tempers shaped the world around them. But as the new faith spread across Europe, the old gods could not simply remain. They were too deeply woven into the hearts and minds of the people. So, in whispers, in stories, and in the shadows of the forest, they were transformed, hidden in plain sight, their grandeur reduced, yet their magic preserved. They became the fairies of folklore. And though we now imagine fairies as playful, mischievous sprites, their origins tell a very different story. They were morally complex beings, capable of great kindness or terrible wrath. They could bless crops and protect villages, or punish those who disrespected the sacred. They were gods who never truly left us, only slipped into shadow, waiting patiently for the curious, the brave, and the dreamers. Tonight we'll step into that shadow and uncover the hidden truths of the fair folk, the ancient deities who refuse to vanish, the magical beings who continue to haunt our stories, and the mysteries that still shimmer just beyond the edge of our world. Long before fairies fluttered among roses, they dwelled in the deep landscapes of the British Isles. The word fae, or fair folk, referred to a wide and varied host of supernatural beings. In the Middle Ages, fairies were not miniature or winged. They were often imagined as human-sized, sometimes beautiful, sometimes monstrous. Their defining feature was their unpredictability. They could bless a household with abundance or curse it with misfortune. They might reward kindness, yet punish insult, and above all, they were not to be trusted. One of the greatest fears of parents was the changeling. Folklore warned that fairies might steal a healthy human child, leaving behind a sickly fairy infant in its place. In other tales, travellers walking alone at night might be pixie-led, lured off the safe path by ghostly lights or music, only to be lost in the moorlands until dawn. Fairies belonged to wild, liminal places, those thresholds between the human and the otherworldly. They haunted hillsides and caves, rivers and streams, and above all, ancient earthworks. Barrows and stone circles were said to be the dwellings of fair folk. To disturb them was dangerous. Even ploughing a fairy mound could bring a curse upon a farmer's family. Not all were distant. Some fairies lived close to human homes. The brownie, for instance, was a household helper, a small, shaggy spirit who performed chores at night in exchange for a bowl of milk or cream. But if slighted, the brownie could become a boggart, a malicious force who caused endless mischief. It is important to note that these beings were not yet linked with manicured gardens. In medieval and early modern England, gardens were rare and formal spaces, walled enclaves of monasteries, noble estates or manor houses. Ordinary people encountered fairies not among flower beds, but in the raw countryside surrounding their villages. Meanwhile, another tradition entirely was taking root in Europe, that of the gnome. In German folklore, gnomes were earth dwellers, guardians of mines and buried treasure. By the 1840s, ornamental gnome statues had made their way into English gardens, yet they were distinct from the native fairy lore of England. The fairies of folklore were older, wilder, and far more ambiguous, and yet, by the 19th century, their image would soften, transformed by art, literature, and the changing spirit of the age. The 19th century brought enormous change. As England industrialised, cities expanded, factories roared and smoke filled the skies. For many Victorians, there was a longing for the natural world, a nostalgia for innocence and beauty. Into this yearning stepped the fairy, reimagined not as a dangerous spirit, but as a symbol of purity, nature, and childlike wonder. This transformation happened on various fronts. First, in spiritual and mystical circles. Within theosophy, an esoteric movement of the late 19th century, fairies were described as devas, nature spirits who tended plants and flowers. Writers such as E.L. Gardner claimed that these beings were luminous, delicate, and essential to the life of the garden, channeling the sun's energy into the earth. Theosophy reframed fairies not as tricksters of the night, but as essential allies in the great chain of nature. Second, in art and literature. Victorian artists such as Richard Dadd and John Anster Fitzgerald created fantastical fairy scenes, lush, colourful, filled with flowers and glowing sprites. Their paintings were often set in gardens and glades, places of cultivated magic. Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, long popular, was revived in the 19th century with stage productions featuring tiny winged fairies in flower-filled settings. The characters of Titiana, Oberon and Puck enchanted new generations, cementing the fairy as a playful, mischievous but largely harmless figure. Later, J.M. Barrie would give us Peter Pan, with its famous sprite Tinkerbell, an image of the fairy as no larger than a hand, fiery, winged and full of charm. Then came the Cottingley fairies. In 1917, two cousins in Yorkshire, Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths, produced a series of photographs. In them, the girls appeared in their garden surrounded by small winged fairies. The figures were paper cutouts, carefully posed, yet at the time many believed them genuine. Even the great author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, best known for creating Sherlock Holmes, was convinced. To a nation weary from the First World War, the photographs offered hope that enchantment still lived among the hedgerows and flower beds. For years, the Cottingley fairies were taken as proof that the gentle garden-dwelling fairies truly existed. Finally, perhaps the most enduring influence of all came from an artist named Cicely Mary Barker. In 1923, Barker published her first volume of Flower Fairies. Each page paired a delicate watercolour with a poem. The illustrations showed tiny fairies dressed in the petals and leaves of specific plants: the primrose fairy, the lavender fairy, the rose fairy. Barker's work enchanted both children and adults. Her fairies were benevolent, innocent, and inseparable from the flowers they inhabited. With her art, the fairy moved definitively from the wild moor and the shadowed barrow into the cultivated English garden. By the early 20th century, fairies had been utterly transformed. No longer the dangerous spirits of folklore, they were now the gentle guardians of nature, companions of childhood, and symbols of beauty within the garden wall. Today, the legacy of this transformation lives on in gardens across England and far beyond. The idea of the fairy garden has become a beloved hobby. Miniature houses, tiny furniture, and little figurines are arranged among plants and flower beds, inviting fairies to take up residence. For children, planting a fairy garden is an introduction to both imagination and the rhythms of nature. Certain plants retain strong fairy associations. Foxgloves, with their tall spires of purple bells, are still known in folklore as fairy gloves, thought to be worn by the little folk. Bluebells are said to ring and summon fairies to dance. Alder trees are both revered and feared, sacred to fairy queens. To this day, gardeners plant these species with a quiet nod to tradition. The popularity of fairy imagery has also inspired festivals, tours and folklore walks throughout England. On Dartmoor, in Cornwall and in rural heritage sites across the country, visitors are invited to explore the landscapes of fairy lore. And of course, popular culture continues to shape our vision of fairies through children's books, fantasy films and countless works of art. Yet, in gardens, their most enduring presence is quiet. A statue nestled among roses, a tiny door at the base of a tree, or a hand-painted stone with wings. Fairies may have changed over time, but the enchantment they bring remains the same. They remind us that a garden is not only a human creation, it is a meeting place, a threshold where imagination, memory, and the unseen all converge. From feared spirits of the wilderness to beloved companions of the flower garden, the fairies of England have journeyed through centuries of belief and imagination. They began as unpredictable, dangerous forces haunting the margins of human life, but over time they became guardians of innocence, symbols of beauty, and keepers of the garden's secret life. Perhaps that is their greatest gift, to remind us that the world is never entirely under our control, and that even in the ordered spaces of a garden, mystery still blooms. So the next time you walk through a quiet garden at dusk, pause a moment. Listen to the wind in the leaves, the ring of unseen bells, the shimmer of wings just out of sight. You may not see them, but the fairies of England still dance.